Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss the quintessential cards needed to build the core of an Aristocrat commander deck with Teysa Karlov as its general. Teysa Karlov debuted in Ravnica Allegiance and is a 2/4 human advisor for 2 in Orzhov colors. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Teysa also gives creature tokens we control Vigilance and Lifelink. Notice the text secondary to Teysa's death trigger. Our permanents trigger an additional time whenever any creature dies, not just ours. Our goal here is pretty straightforward. We want to build the core of this deck with powerful and resourceful death triggers, various sacrifice outlets for the purposes of activating these triggers, a host of sacrificial fodder, and Teysa on the battlefield to speed up this process. With our gratuitously beneficial self-sacrifice engine fully revving, we will control the battlefield and our opponents on the path to imminent victory. Let's begin the core of this build with abilities that trigger whenever a creature we control dies. Norn's Wellspring allows us to scry 1 and put an oil counter on it. We can pay 1, tap it, remove 2 oil counters from it, and draw a card. Pitiless Plunderer creates a treasure token. Sanguinary Priest deals 1 point of life-linking damage to any target, while Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent, and we gain 1 life. Whenever any creature we own dies, Athreos, God of Passage, returns it to our hand unless target opponent pays 3 life. Paired with Teysa, the payment of 6 life may be too rich for our opponent's blood. Both Butcher of Massacre and Dictate of Erebus forces each opponent to sacrifice a creature whenever a creature we control dies, while Lolth, Spider Queen, gets a loyalty counter. Through this robust way of increasing her loyalty, in addition to drawing cards, creating creature tokens, and emblems that can tick down our opponent's life totals very quickly, Lolth is a force to be reckoned with in an Aristocrat build. For a little restriction secondary to our death triggers, but still worthy of inclusion, Requiem Angel creates a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying whenever a non-spirit creature we control dies. Whenever a creature we control without flying dies, Luminous Broodmoth returns it to the battlefield under our control with a flying counter on it. Whenever a non-token creature we control dies, Sifter of Skulls creates a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion that can be sacrificed to add a colorless mana. Field of Souls creates a 1/1 white spirit with flying. Open the Graves creates a 2/2 black zombie, and Ogre Slumlord creates a 1/1 black rat. Pawn of Ulamog's death trigger also extends to itself. We create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi Spawn whenever Pawn of Ulamog or a non-token creature we control dies. This Eldrazi Spawn can be sacrificed to add a colorless mana. We can use this mana to cast spells from cards drawn from Grim Haruspics, Harvester of Souls, and Midnight Reaper. Each card drawn from Midnight Reaper's trigger deals 1 point of damage to us, while Harvester of Souls' card draw trigger is optional. Since we are brewing an Aristocrat-themed build, it makes sense to include a slew of creatures that create creature tokens upon their demise. Through this dynamic, we can double dip with sacrifice fodder, and when Teysa is in play, we will dip again. Each of these creatures costs 1 white mana, and when they die, Doomed Traveler creates a 1/1 white spirit with flying, Hunted Witness creates a 1/1 white soldier, Garrison Cat creates a 1/1 white human soldier, and Crawling Chorus creates a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. It may not be able to block, but it sure can be sacrificed. Carrier Thrall and Doomed Dissenter each respectively create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion that can be sacrificed for a colorless mana and a 2/2 black zombie. And when Imperious Oligarch and Orzhov Enforcer die, we create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying through their Afterlife mechanic. Ministrant of Obligation creates 2 of these 1/1 white and black spirits with flying, which make great sacrificial fodder for Teysa Karlov Scion. If we sacrifice 3 white creatures, then we exile target creature. Teysa also creates a 1/1 white spirit with flying whenever another black creature we control dies. Speaking of whenever another creature we control dies, Lenda, the Dusk Rose, gets a +1/+1 counter whenever this happens. And when Lenda dies, we create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is equal to Lenda's power. Alongside our general, Lenda can get out of hand very, very quickly. Now that we have created oodles of resources and an abundance of sacrificial fodder, let's add some win conditions to the core of this build. Whenever it or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life through Zulaport Cutthroat and Cruel Celebrant. Cruel Celebrant also triggers whenever a planeswalker we control dies. Bastion of Remembrance continues the creature-dying, life-draining loop while also creating a 1/1 white human soldier creature token when it enters the battlefield. As if Teysa wasn't strong enough already, Agent of the Iron Throne staples an additional ability onto our general. Whenever an artifact or a creature we control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. Speaking of each opponent losing 1 life, Elas Il Kor, Sadistic Pilgrim, does this whenever another creature we control dies. It also has the bonus of gaining us 1 life whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control. With Corpse Knight, each opponent loses 1 life instead. The Meat Hook Massacre's abilities are triggered based on which creatures are dying. If a creature we control dies, then each opponent loses 1 life. If a creature our opponents control dies, then we gain 1 life. We can cast this enchantment for just 2 black mana, or we can pay an additional X to have each creature get -X/-X until end of turn when the Meat Hook Massacre enters the battlefield. For targeted life drain effects, both Blood Artist and Falconwrath Noble drain target opponent of 1 life, and we gain 1 life whenever it or another creature dies. These creatures' abilities could be more potent than the previously mentioned creatures, as they trigger whenever any creature on the battlefield dies, and not just ours. With a loyal and willing class of aristocrats paired with numerous profitable and game-shifting death triggers, all that remains is for our creatures to die. Let's expedite this process by including our own sacrifice spells and effects. Village Rites and Altar's Reap are instants that require 1 of our creatures to be sacrificed as an additional cost to cast them, and our rewards are drawing 2 cards and sending 1 of our creatures to the graveyard. Costly Plunder does the same, but extends its sacrificial fodder requirement to include artifacts, while Deadly Dispute is a clone of Costly Plunder, except that we also create a treasure token in addition to drawing 2 cards. Depending on the number of creatures on our side of the battlefield, Plum the Forbidden could net us a ton of cards and numerous dying creatures. When we cast it, we may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. If we do, then we copy this spell for each creature we sacrificed. For each creature we sacrificed, we draw a card and lose 1 life, on top of the original 1 card drawn and 1 life lost by casting this spell. With any peripheral life-gaining abilities on our side of the battlefield, this loss of life should not be a concern. For repeatable sacrificial outlets, Viscera Seer is the gold standard. We sacrifice a creature and we scry 1. Carrion Feeder also has a sacrifice outlet, and it gets a +1/+1 counter each time we use it. Cartel Aristocrat gains protection from the color of our choice until end of turn, while Yeheni Undying Partisan gains indestructible until end of turn. As a bonus, Yeheni gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a creature an opponent controls dies. Woe Strider has a Viscera Seer-like death trigger of scrying 1, and when it comes into play, we create a 0/1 white goat creature token. We also can cast this creature from our graveyard through its escape mechanic by paying 3 and 2 black mana and exiling 4 other cards from our graveyard. If we cast Woe Strider this way, then it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it, in addition to creating the aforementioned Goat token. The ability to bring Woe Strider back from our graveyard should serve our Aristocrat engine very, very well. Speaking of graveyards, Altar of Dementia's sacrifice ability has target player put a number of cards from the top of their library into their graveyard equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Absent any auto-shuffle effects lurking in an opponent's library, this could be game-ending. Both Fanatical Devotion and Martyr's Cause are enchantments that, respectively, regenerates target creature or prevents the damage dealt by any source until end of turn. Let's accrue some additional benefits from our creature's deaths that will assist us in widening the resource gap between us and our opponents. We put a charge counter on Spawning Pit whenever we sacrifice a creature to it. We also can pay 1, remove 2 charge counters from it, and create a 2/2 colorless Spawn artifact creature token. By sacrificing our creatures to Phyrexian Altar or Ashnod's Altar, we add 1 mana of any color or 2 colorless mana, respectively. With the card draw abilities showcased earlier in this video, in addition to the mana generated by these 2 artifacts upon activating their triggered abilities, it should only be a matter of time before our opponent's life totals tick down to 0. Let's close out this video by including some cards that synergize with and strengthen our Aristocrat theme. Skull Clamp draws us 2 cards when an equipped creature dies, and with an equip cost of 1 and a potentially lethal -1 toughness detraction, this artifact could net us a ton of cards. Ink Shield prevents all combat damage that will be dealt to us this turn. For each 1 point of damage prevented this way, we create a 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying. These creature tokens make excellent sacrifice fodder for our Aristocrat engine. Speaking of tokens, with the potential to create tokens in numerous ways present in the core of this build, we can consider Anointed Procession and Mondrak Glory Dominus as worthy inclusions. Each doubles the number of tokens created under our control, while Mondrak has an activated ability that allows us to pay 1 and 2 white Phyrexian mana, sacrifice 2 other creatures and or artifacts, and put an indestructible counter on it. Just because our creatures are in the graveyard does not mean their usefulness ends. Ascend from Avernus returns all creature and planeswalker cards from our graveyard to the battlefield with mana value X or less. Rally the Ancestors limits its recursion to just creature cards. This spell can be cast at instant speed, and the returned creatures are exiled at the beginning of our next upkeep. This is not a problem for us. They'll be sacrificed to something long before this ability triggers at the beginning of our next upkeep. It should be noted that each of these spells are exiled upon resolution. Our Aristocrat engine is a win condition in and of itself. Our general, Teysa Karlov, simply speeds up our game plan. If Teysa is otherwise indisposed by languishing in the command zone due to overtaxation, then Drivnod Carnage Dominus is a very reasonable secondary option, since it mimics Teysa's death trigger ability. It also has a very reasonable way to put an indestructible counter on it by paying 2 black Phyrexian mana and exiling 3 creature cards from our graveyard. With the potential of having an indestructible 8/3 creature that enhances the theme of this build by mimicking our general's triggered ability, we consider Drivnod a win condition here. Speaking of win conditions, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent whenever another creature dies, or whenever a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or whenever a creature card leaves our graveyard. If needed, we can use Sir Conrad's built-in mill ability by paying 1 and a black mana and having each player put the top card of their library into their graveyard. Sir Conrad is a powerful win condition option here, and it shouldn't take long to finish off our opponents with him on our side of the battlefield. Finally, Exsanguinate and Debt to the Deathless are game-ending sorceries. Exsanguinate drains each opponent for X life, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way, while Debt to the Deathless doubles Exsanguinate's output for an additional 2 white mana. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of an Aristocrat commander deck around Teysa Karlov as its general. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. The cards discussed during this video are suggested options for crafting the core of an Aristocrat EDH deck, in addition to providing ways to optimize this theme. Let me know your thoughts about these recommendations in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.